I was savoring my first sip of lemonade when Karen's scream pierced the air so sharply that my dog dropped his bone and scampered inside like a frightened pup. "You there, get off that porch before I call the police," she bellowed, jabbing a finger at me as if I were a midnight intruder. I blinked, glanced down at my fuzzy slippers, then back at her. She truly believed I was trespassing on my own turf. I hadn't even gotten to my second sip before she yanked out her phone, dialed 911, and started painting me as a shady figure lurking on the Wexler house steps. Little did she know, and what would soon turn her week upside down, was that not only did I live here, I was the mayor's wife, and she'd just turned my peaceful porch swing into a full-blown political scandal. It all kicked off earlier, that Sunday morning, when I woke up later than usual, soaking in the rare calm of a day off with no press conferences looming for my husband. The city had been a mess all month, trash piling up, potholes everywhere, and a heated rezoning debate splitting the town in two, but none of that touched me as I padded outside in my robe and settled into my front porch haven. Our beautiful craftsman-style home, perched on the corner lot of Cedar Loop, nestled in a mostly serene neighborhood, save for one glaring exception: Karen, our neighbor 2 doors down, HOA board member, watchdog, and self-appointed guardian of the community. I had just leaned back in the porch swing with a book in one hand and lemonade in the other when I heard the unmistakable clap of rubber-soled sandals approaching. Like a storm, Karen had a way of making her presence known. As loud as her voice when she began, she didn't even glance at my face before she launched into an accusation. "Excuse me, you can't be here." I raised an eyebrow and offered a small wave. "Morning, Karen." She paused, clearly thrown off. "Who are you?" she demanded. "This is private property. The Wexlers live here." I actually laughed out loud. "Yes, I know I'm Mrs. Wexler." Karen's mouth tightened like she had bitten into a lemon, studied me like I was some kind of intruder, failing to see past the messy bun and pajama pant. "That's me," I said, still amused. Maybe the paper caught me on a better hair day. But she wouldn't hear it. "You're trespassing," she insisted. "You need to leave now, or I'm calling 911. I glanced around, as if maybe there was a hidden camera crew somewhere, filming a prank show. "Karen, this is my porch. This is my house. You're embarrassing yourself." But her finger was already jabbing at her phone screen, her lips tight with frustration. "911. Yes, I'm reporting a suspicious woman on private property. She refuses to identify herself. I think she might be trying to break in." I didn't even bother interrupting her this time. I just leaned back and took another long sip of lemonade. My dog, Murphy, peeked his head through the window blinds inside and stared at the scene unfolding like even he couldn't believe it when the police car rolled into the neighborhood. 5 minutes later, Karen stood proudly at the edge of my walkway, waving them down like she just saved the town from a bank robber. The officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, clearly expecting this to be a quick drive-by warning. I could see it in his posture. Another false alarm from HOA. Karen. She had a reputation even among the city officers, and they tried to avoid these calls whenever possible, but it was protocol. So he approached me first, asking politely, "Ma'am, can I see some ID?" Before I could even reach into my robe pocket, the radio on his chest buzzed. "Unit 27B, advised possible ID match, confirmed. That's Mrs. Wexler, wife of Mayor Richard Wexler. Repeat, this is the mayor's residence." The officer straightened, and his face changed from skeptical to mortified in under a second. Karen's smirk fell off her face like melted frosting. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Like dry leaves. That's impossible. That can't be her. She doesn't even look." She stopped herself, but the implication was already in the air. Just as the officer opened his mouth to apologize, a black city vehicle pulled into our driveway. My husband stepped out, his signature navy suit making him look every inch the public servant. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over, kissed me on the cheek, and then turned to face Karen. She was visibly sweating now, her hands trembling as she stuffed her phone back into her purse. "Mr. Mayor, I thought someone was breaking in." I didn't recognize her. She looked different. My husband kept his smile polite, but his eyes were sharp. "You mean?" She looked relaxed, like someone spending a Sunday morning on her own porch, in her own house. Karen's lip trembled, but she stood her ground. "It's just so many people come and go. I try to keep an eye out." My husband's tone turned icier. "You called 911 on my wife, accused her of trespassing, and refused to believe her when she identified herself. That's not keeping an eye out. That's harassment." The officer nodded quietly, agreeing. "She's done this before," he added, glancing at Karen. "False alarms, complaints, HOA disputes." Karen stepped back like she'd been slapped. "I didn't mean any harm," she stammered. "I was just doing my duty." That was when the twist came. Another officer arrived, this one from the city records department. Apparently, when Karen made the call, she also submitted an HOA report claiming our property was vacant. That triggered a flag in the city system, a flag that only comes up if a house is listed as unoccupied, often for tax evasion or squatting investigations. She had done more than just call the cops on me. She had launched an official complaint, complete with false documentation. My husband stepped back, jaw tight. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to deny it, but the second officer held up the printed submission. Her name, her email, her digital signature, her lie. I sat there, stunned, watching the woman who once handed out cookies at HOA potlucks, now caught red-handed in what could easily be considered a legal offense. The police didn't arrest her, not yet, but they did give her a formal warning. My husband, ever the public figure, kept things civil. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen left in a huff, nearly tripping over the edge of the lawn, while the officers lingered, chatting with my husband. One even apologized to me for the interruption, but I just laughed and said that was the most exciting thing to happen on this porch in years. As the city vehicle pulled away and the sun finally dipped below the rooftops, I sat back in the swing, shaken but strangely entertained. I had just been accused of breaking into my own house by a neighbor who had no idea she'd tangled with the mayor's wife, but deep down, I knew something else. Karen wasn't going to let this go, and neither was I. By the next morning, you would think the entire ordeal would have fizzled out, tucked neatly under the category of embarrassing HOA drama. But not with Karen. Most people, after nearly getting caught lying to law enforcement and being humiliated in front of the mayor, would retreat quietly, maybe bake a peace-offering pie, or at least pretend nothing happened. But Karen wasn't. Most people, by 8 a.m., she was outside again, this time with a file folder tucked under her arm and a determined squint in her eyes that said she had not only doubled down but might be ready to try calling Homeland Security. Next, my husband had left early for City Hall, and I was watering the front flower beds when she approached, tiptoeing along the sidewalk like a reporter chasing a scandal. I didn't even get a good morning, just a cold "we need to talk." She stood in front of my porch like it was a courtroom, and she was cross-examining me. She waved the folder like a winning lottery ticket and said, "I have documentation proof that your home was registered as vacant legally. It could be flagged for community review." I was listening to a bedtime story. Karen flipped the folder open dramatically, revealing several printed pages, none of which were official city documents. At a glance, they were just poorly printed screenshots of an HOA database, and some handwritten notes that looked like a teenager had made them for a school project. But I kept my face neutral. She was on a mission, and something told me this folder was her ticket to doubling down on her actions from the day before. I asked her plainly where she got the notion our house was unoccupied. She sniffed and said, "You were gone for months. No one saw you. The place looked empty." I did what any responsible community member would do and flagged it for review. That was when it clicked last fall. I had been out of town for nearly 6 weeks, taking care of my mother, who had a medical scare. My husband stayed here for city duties, but with long work hours and my absence, the house was quieter than usual. Karen must have taken that as an opportunity. I realized this wasn't about an honest mistake. This was a plot, months in the making. I asked if she had ever tried knocking or even reaching out to my husband, the mayor, to ask if everything was okay. Her reply: "I didn't want to bother him. I assumed he was gone too. I couldn't help myself." "So your plan was to just report the property vacant and hope for the best?" Karen's eyes flicked with something I hadn't expected. Nervousness. I pressed further, asking if she had any idea how much trouble she could be in for submitting a false vacancy claim to the city, and her answer was priceless. "I wasn't lying," she said. "I was just prematurely reporting." I nearly choked on my own breath. It only got worse when the HOA president, Dan, showed up. Apparently Karen had already called him that morning to report what she described as a hostile homeowner occupying a flagged property. Dan shuffled up the driveway with an apologetic look on his face and a clipboard of his own. His arrival made me laugh internally because it looked like some ridiculous suburban standoff. Me with my hose, Karen with her folder, and Dan trying to play referee with a clipboard. Dan greeted me, asked if he could speak privately, and I invited him to the porch, though Karen trailed behind like an unwanted +1. Dan lowered his voice and admitted that Karen had been pestering the HOA for months about our property. She had insisted we were absentee owners, which triggered a procedural review. The issue: the HOA never did any physical inspection. They relied entirely on her word and a couple of grainy photos she took from across the street. No one had checked in with my husband or looked at property tax payments, which had been filed on time every month. Dan was visibly uncomfortable. It wasn't hard to see he knew this could snowball quickly. An HOA initiating complaints against the mayor's family without verifying facts wasn't just bad optics. It could be a political disaster. Karen stood by the steps, interjecting every few seconds with phrases like community integrity and "we deserve transparency." I asked Dan if this entire situation could have been avoided by one email or phone call. He nodded slowly. Then I dropped the bombshell: "My husband is filing a formal complaint with the city. We're also requesting an audit of the HOA's reporting procedures." Karen's face froze. Dan looked like he aged 10 years in 5 seconds. She tried to interrupt, but this time Dan held up a hand. "Karen," he said, "I think it's best you let me handle this from here." Karen didn't leave gracefully. She muttered something. Dan sat with me for another 10 minutes, going over the process, For correcting the erroneous vacancy report, he promised it would be removed from the HOA records by the end of the day, and I made it clear I would be getting confirmation in writing. As he left, he apologized again more sincerely this time, and I could tell he regretted ever entertaining Karen's complaints. Without real proof, that night, I told my husband everything. He was calmer than I expected, but I could see the wheels turning. In his head, he said this wasn't just about us, it was about how easily HOA powers could be abused when there were no checks and balances. He drafted a proposal for a new citywide guideline requiring all HOA claims. It wasn't vengeance, it was smart governance. I kissed him and told him I had never been more proud, but even as I felt a sense of closure beginning to settle, something told me Karen wasn't finished. People like her never back down after getting humiliated. They retreat, they regroup, and then they go looking for a new way to strike. Sure enough, the very next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. A neighbor had tagged me in a Facebook group post. Karen had taken her battle digital. The post was filled with dramatic language, accusing me of impersonating a public official, threatening HOA members, and using the mayor's office to intimidate innocent residents. She even attached blurry, zoomed-in photos of me watering the lawn, claiming I was spying on the block. The post didn't go the way she hoped. Dozens of comments flooded, and defending me, some from people I hadn't even spoken to in months. One woman wrote, "Karen, if I had known sitting on your own porch in yoga pants was a felony, I'd be in prison by now." Another added, pretty bold, to accuse the mayor's wife of espionage because she grows petunias. Karen tried to argue back, but it was like watching a one-woman war collapse in slow motion. Every reply only fueled more mockery. My personal favorite was someone posting a meme of me on my porch with the caption, "America's most relaxed fugitive." As the sun set again, I stood on the same porch, sipping the same lemonade, but with a new understanding. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It was a full-blown storm brewing, and Karen had just thrown the first punch. But what she didn't know, what she still couldn't grasp, was that by trying to erase me from this street, she had awakened something far bigger, and the next move that was mine. It was just after 9 o'clock a.m. when I realized Karen had escalated beyond the sidewalk and file folders. She had entered the internet arena. I had barely finished my breakfast when my phone began lighting up with notifications, pings, and tags. At first, I thought maybe someone posted about a city event or a viral animal video, but the moment nearly choked on my coffee. Karen had uploaded a 3-minute video she had filmed of me without my knowledge. She had zoomed in like a crime investigator and added a caption in all caps, "Who is this woman really? Mayor's wife or imposter?" The comments section was a battlefield. Half the people rolled their eyes and told her to sit down. Others laughed, pointing out that maybe I didn't want to wear makeup while grabbing an Amazon box. But Karen wasn't done. She responded to every sarcastic comment with long, paranoid explanations about city corruption, fake identities, and a mysterious SUV she claimed parked outside my home at odd hours. That SUV, by the way, belonged to my husband's driver. This would have been comical if it weren't so relentless. She had posted 3 more photos by noon, including one where I was trimming rose bushes, claiming I was planting hidden cameras under the guise of landscaping. I ignored it at first. Then my husband sent me a text with 3 words, "Check Reddit." Now I did, and there it was. Someone had posted doorbell camera footage of the original 911 incident. The angle was clear. It showed Karen on the sidewalk, phone in hand, angrily yelling into the device, while I calmly sat on my porch swing, looking more amused than threatened. The clip had been titled, "Karen Calls Cops on Mayor's Wife for Sitting Down," and was already gaining traction on a popular subreddit. It wasn't just the video that captured attention, it was the absurdity, the fact that someone could accuse a woman of trespassing on her own porch and do it with such conviction struck a nerve with people across the internet. In just hours, the video had thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and a rapidly growing meme collection. One person added, "This woman breathes aggressively and looks suspiciously hydrated." Someone else made a mock poster that said, "Wanted for Porch video." But the moment I saw the words "Mayor's Wife, Porch Scandal," and "Karengate" trending in our neighborhood's community Facebook group, I knew this was something else entirely. I clicked the link and nearly choked on my coffee. Karen had uploaded a 3i0 video. Or imposter. The comments section was a battlefield. Half the people rolled their eyes and told her to sit down. Others laughed, pointing out that maybe I didn't want to wear makeup while grabbing an Amazon box. But Karen wasn't done. She responded to every sarcastic comment with long paranoid explanations about city corruption, fake identities, and a mysterious SUV, by the way, belonged to my husband's driver. This would have been comical if it weren't so relentless. She had posted 3 more photos by noon, including one where I was trimming rose bushes, claiming I was planting hidden cameras under the guise of landscaping. I ignored it at first. Then my husband sent me a text with 3 words, "Check Reddit." Now I did, and there it was. Someone had posted doorbell camera footage of the original 911 incident. The angle was clear. It showed Karen on the sidewalk, phone in hand, angrily yelling into the device, while I calmly sat on my porch swing, looking more amused than threatened. The clip had been titled, "Karen Calls Cops on Mayor's Wife for Sitting Down," and was already gaining traction on a popular subreddit. It wasn't just the video that captured attention. It was the absurdity, the fact that someone could accuse a woman of trespassing on her own porch and do it with such conviction struck a nerve with people across the internet. In just hours, the video had thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and a rapidly growing meme collection. One person added dramatic violin music to Karen's call and dubbed in fake subtitles like, "This woman breathes aggressively and looks suspiciously hydrated." Someone else made a mock poster that said, "Wanted for porch loitering, armed with lemonade and a strong legal standing." Even local media outlets began picking it up. The clip aired on a small morning news program with the anchor chuckling at the audacity. They blurred out Karen's face for legal reasons, but anyone from our neighborhood recognized her immediately. Karen, of course, was furious. She claimed the footage was doctored. She began accusing me publicly of orchestrating a media smear campaign, saying I had connections in the city and was manipulating public opinion. She made a TikTok account just to rant about how the government was turning against her, wearing sunglasses indoors, while whispering about HOA surveillance and deep state infiltration of community board. Meanwhile, people in the community were rallying behind me in the most unexpected ways. Neighbors I had never really spoken to waved at me more often, dropped off small treats at our porch, and even made lawn signs that read "Justice for the Porch." One kid painted a little wooden cutout shaped like a swing with a phrase "Let her sit" carved into it. I hung it proudly on the porch post, but the real surprise came when a local podcast host reached out. They wanted to interview me about what they dubbed the porch power play. I declined, not wanting to turn my neighborhood dispute into a media tour, but it showed me abuse of authority and the hilarity of suburban politic. Karen wasn't just a local nuisance anymore. She had become a national symbol of the wrong kind of vigilance. Then the city issued a statement. My husband had wisely kept quiet in public, but had been working behind the scenes. The city clarified the legal issues around HOA, reporting, and misuse of emergency services. Without naming names, the release addressed the dangers of citizens filing false 911 calls, pointing out that wasting city resources was a chargeable offense. Karen must have read it, because she showed up at my porch the next day fuming. Her sunglasses were gone, replaced by a venomous glare. She accused me of slandering her, said the neighborhood had turned into a circus. Because of me, I calmly told her, the neighborhood became a circus. The moment she called the police over a woman sitting on a swing, she stepped closer, waving her phone in my face, recording everything. I didn't flinch. She demanded I issue a public apology. When I didn't respond, she hissed, "This isn't over." But it was over for her, because the more she lashed out, the more support came my way. People saw her for what she was: not a hero, not a protector, just a bored-controlling neighbor with too much time and far too much confidence. The climax came when someone uploaded a parody music video. It featured reenactments of Karen's 911 call, set to the beat of a pop song, with someone in a visor and Velcro sandals lip-syncing her lines. It was both outrageous and strangely well produced. Even my husband couldn't stop laughing when the video hit over 500,000 views. Karen went silent online for a whole day, but when she returned, it was with a vengeance. She had printed flyers, hundreds of them taped to every light pole and mailbox, accusing me of being a political operative planted in the neighborhood to suppress freedom and HOA integrity. She even said my roses had cameras. This was the tipping point, not for me, for the city. A new complaint had been filed, not by me, but by a group of neighbors tired of the drama and false accusations. Karen had created a safety issue. She was inciting community tension, using false narratives, and distributing defamatory material. The police warned her again, only this time they made it clear that the next step involved court. Karen didn't respond well. She filmed herself. And so I sat on my porch one more time, this time with a piece of cake and a sense of calm. The swing creaked gently under me, birds chirped, and the wind carried the smell of fresh-cut grass. A delivery driver passed and gave me a salute. I laughed. Karen might have tried to erase me from my own street, but all she did was make sure everyone knew exactly who I was. I wasn't just the mayor's wife. I was the woman who survived Karen. And somehow the porch had become more than a place to sit at, had become a symbol, a battleground, and eventually a throne. A few days after the parody, structure and clarity to what had become an unmanageable spiral of neighborhood nonsense and escalating tension, he scheduled a press conference outside City Hall under the guise of rolling out new homeowner protection guidelines. But it was clear from the moment the microphones came out that the public wanted answers about what everyone was now calling Porchgate. The press gathered, some with amused expressions, and others eager to spin this into the next sensational headline behind them. A modest crowd had formed, many of them familiar faces from our neighborhood, Some brought lawn chairs, a few even brought porch swings on wheels as a not-so-subtle nod to the root of it all. There was even a sign that read, "Porch rights are civil." Right, my husband stepped to the podium and began with his usual calm, composed tone. He thanked the city for their patience during what he described as an unusual chapter in local politics, and then, without naming names, he detailed how misuse of emergency services and unverified HOA claims could escalate into serious community disruption. He paused for effect, looked at the cameras, and said, "When a resident feels entitled to weaponize procedure and target a neighbor with no evidence, or, 'cause we must call it what it is, harassment." The crowd murmured in agreement. He explained the city would be implementing new oversight protocols for all HOA submissions involving property vacancy, resident conduct, and neighborhood dispute. Each submission would now require photographic verification, witness corroboration, and a minimum two-step review process by city administrators. I had no doubt she was watching from behind her curtain, clutching a notepad and muttering about conspiracies. What came next was the part Karen never anticipated. Following the press conference, the city filed an internal review request of the HOA Leadership Board. While the city could not directly control HOA policy, they had the right to investigate whether municipal codes and residential ordinances were being violated under the current HOAS watch. That meant President Dan was pulled into a formal review, and the committee's internal communications were requested for transparency, and just like that, skeletons started rattling out of closets. It came to light that Karen had filed not one, not two, but 7 similar vacancy claims over the past year. One targeted a young couple who were away for a honeymoon. Another went after an elderly woman who traveled to Florida for winter. The pattern was clear. Karen was systematically targeting homes that in her eyes seemed too quiet, too free, or two different things. Accelerated quickly after that, the city issued Karen a civil notice of intent to investigate based on false claims submitted to government systems. The legal jargon was heavy, but the meaning was simple. Karen had potentially committed fraud by submitting reports under the false pretense of community concern. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's support for her collapsed almost overnight at the last HOA meeting held under a folding tent at the community park. She arrived to find her chair gone. It had been replaced with a small plastic stool labeled "Observer President." Don, to his credit, attempted to maintain order, but the energy had shifted. Neighbors were openly calling for a vote of no confidence, demanding that Karen be barred from submitting further reports or participating in board discussions. Until the investigation concluded, I didn't attend the meeting in person, but I got a play-by-play texted to me by Lisa, one of the more level-headed residents and a former judge. She told me Karen tried to argue, claimed it was a witch hunt, accused me of being a political plant sent to silence her. Lisa's exact message read, "She's unraveling like a sweater in a catfight." Dan tried to intervene but failed to calm the group. By the end of the night, a motion had been passed to suspend Karen's voting privileges on all HOA matters. Pending the city's decision, she stormed off mid-vote, knocking over a table with lemonade pictures as she went. But Karen wasn't finished. Just as the neighborhood thought things might finally quiet down, she tried to stage her comeback by filing a lawsuit against me. The accusation was emotional distress. Her argument was that the viral Video community backlash and loss of her reputation were all direct consequences of my refusal to clarify my identity. On that now infamous afternoon, she actually claimed that I could have prevented all of this had I simply stood up, introduced myself formally, and invited her inside. I nearly dropped my coffee when I read the paperwork. Even our lawyer had to read it twice. My husband's legal team responded immediately, pointing out that the 911 call, false documentation, online harassment, and ongoing public defamation originated from her actions, not mine. The court date was set for a preliminary hearing. It wasn't even a full trial, but Karen treated it like her personal redemption tour. She wore a navy pantsuit and carried a binder, 3 in thick, filled with color-coded dividers and dramatic cover sheets, like hostile yard activity and non-compliant porch etiquette. When the judge, a seasoned woman with a long record of cutting through nonsense, asked Karen to summarize her claim, Karen stood and said with shaking hands that she felt hunted in her own neighborhood and that she had been emotionally tormented by the image of me swinging back and forth on a porch that should have symbolized community order. The courtroom went so silent you could hear the wheels of someone's pens spinning. Our lawyer simply handed over the doorbell footage, the HOA complaint timeline, and screenshots of Karen's social media rant. The judge didn't even need to review it all. She looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, I believe the only person disturbing your peace is you." "Case dismissed," Karen gasped, then tried to argue, but the judge had already moved on to the next item. As we left the courtroom, a few reporters waiting outside snapped photos, and someone even asked me for a comment. I simply said, "I think everyone deserves a peaceful place to sit. Let's not complicate that." Back in the neighborhood, Karen went silent for a few days. Her flyers vanished from mailboxes. Her posts were deleted. The bright neon visor she once wore daily was gone. But while she retreated into a temporary silence, the rest of us moved forward. The HOA board began rewriting procedural rules. This time, with legal consultants, Dan quietly stepped down as president and was replaced by Lisa, who immediately held a meeting titled Community Healing. The tone had shifted. Neighbors began reconnecting, not over gossip or complaints, but shared stories of how the whole mess had reminded them of the importance of respect, trust, and boundaries. As for me, I started getting letters, real ones, handwritten notes left in my mailbox or slid under my doormat. People thanking me for handling the situation with humor and patience. One neighbor said her daughter learned a valuable lesson watching how I never lost my temper. Another offered to repaint my porch swing as a thank you. I politely declined the repainting, but smiled at the gesture. I even received a hand-stitched pillow in the mail that read Porch Queen. I put it proudly on the swing, and every evening I sat out there just like I had before any of this started, with Murphy at my feet and a glass of lemonade in hand. I knew Karen wasn't gone for good. People like her never vanish, they hibernate. But this time, the neighborhood had changed. The system that once enabled her antics had been stripped down, and rebuilt. Her power wasn't just checked, it was dissolved. And more importantly, she knew that no matter how loudly she shouted, no matter how many flyers she printed or videos she filmed, she would never again be able to erase me from the picture, because I wasn't just the woman on the porch anymore. I was the reason it stood. Spring melted into early summer, and with it, the aftershocks of Karen's chaos began to settle like dust after a storm. The neighborhood that once felt tense and divided started to ease into something far more comfortable, even united, where people once whispered behind doors and watched each other through curtains. They now waved across driveways and lingered a little longer during evening walks. I noticed small changes. First, more families planting flowers, kids riding bikes past my porch with easy laughter, and neighbors stopping by just to say hello somehow. My little swing had become more than furniture. It had become a monument, not to me personally, but to the simple right of being left in peace. The city's new HOA oversight rules went into effect by mid-May. Workshops were offered on respectful conflict resolution and neighborhood watch groups received updated training to avoid profiling and false reporting. My husband spoke at several of the sessions, calmly explaining how local leadership and community accountability had to coexist for real change, though he never mentioned Karen by name. Her ghost lingered in every example, and yet she remained unusually quiet. She was still around, still living 2 doors down, but she no longer stormed the sidewalks with clipboards or demanded compliance over imaginary violations. Her house, once trimmed to robotic perfection, began to look more lived in. The grass grew a little taller, her porch went undecorated. The world she tried to control had outgrown her, and I think in some way she finally realized it. Then something unexpected happened. The neighborhood association decided to host a summer block party. It hadn't been done in years, mostly because HOA politics always got in the way, but now, with Lisa leading the board and the community still buzzing from recent reforms, the timing felt right. The idea came up during one of the new open forums, and before long, volunteers had organized food games, music, and even a mini parade. Lisa approached me and asked if I'd be willing to make the opening remarks. I laughed at first, assuming she was joking, but she was serious. She said it would mean something for the person at the center of it all, the woman who unknowingly reminded everyone what a community should be, to help launch this new chapter. I agreed, though I warned her I wasn't much for speeches on the day of the event. I wore a simple summer dress and carried Murphy along with a tray of cupcake. The park had been transformed. String lights hung between trees, grills sizzled, and kids raced through sprinkler tunnels. Folding chairs circled a small platform near the gazebo where I was to speak. As I walked up, the crowd clapped, and for a moment it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like closure. I cleared my throat, looked around, and said, I don't know much about giving speeches, but I do know this: sometimes the smallest spaces, a porch, a swing, a patch of grass, can spark the biggest lessons. I sat on my porch for peace and ended up witnessing something even more powerful. This community found its voice not by shouting louder, but by listening better. By standing up not just for me, but for each other. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was steady, heartfelt, and enough to make me swallow down the lump in my throat. I stepped down, and people came up to hug me, shake my hand, and offer thanks in a dozen different ways. But even on a day like that, there was one person who remained distant. Karen sat on a bench near the edge of the park, not participating, not protesting either. She watched quietly, no visor, no flyers, just her and a paper plate of food that she barely touched. Our eyes met once. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. I nodded politely. She gave a stiff one back. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't war anymore either. It was something in between, maybe even the beginning of surrender. Though knowing Karen, she'd never say the word out loud. The party went well into the evening. People danced, shared stories, and even brought up the infamous video more than once. Usually injustice. Someone gave me a porch-themed gift basket filled with lemonade, mixed sun hats, and a pillow embroidered with the words, "Queen of Calm." Another neighbor joked they were considering writing me in as HOA president. I laughed and told them the only campaign I'd ever run was for more shade trees on the block. As the event wrapped up and the cleanup began, I lingered a little longer in the park. Murphy napped under a picnic table while I sipped from a plastic cup of sparkling cider. Lisa joined me, looking exhausted but proud. She said, "This neighborhood feels different now, doesn't it?" I nodded. "It feels human again." And it did. The pettiness, the fear, the territorial nonsense, it had all been stripped away and replaced with something softer, something stronger, not because of laws or rules, but because people had finally seen what happened when you let paranoia rule instead of kindness. Back at home, I settled into my porch swing. Just as the sun dipped below the trees, the wind was gentle, the chimes above my head playing a soft, tuneless song. I rocked, slowly staring at the street that had once felt like a battlefield and now felt like a village. A few kids still played with glow sticks. Someone lit sparklers. The calm was beautiful, but more than that, it was earned then, as if summoned by fate or irony. Karen walked by slowly alone. She wasn't carrying a phone or clipboard, just herself. She glanced at me again, this time more openly. She stopped at the edge of the lawn for a few seconds. She looked like she might say something. I waited. She hesitated, then spoke. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" It wasn't hostile, just tired. I smiled and shook my head. "No. This is home." She nodded once and moved on, disappearing down the sidewalk without another word. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even peace, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, after all the shouting, all the drama, that's enough. Karen had lost her power, but she hadn't been destroyed. I didn't need that. I didn't want her humiliated or exiled. I just wanted her to stop seeing community as something to control and start seeing it as something to belong. A few days later, the city recognized my husband for his contributions to residential reform and HOA oversight. At the ceremony, they gave me a surprise mention to a simple thank you for reminding people that not all leadership is loud sometimes. It's just sitting in the right place at the right time, refusing to be moved. They gifted me a custom-made plaque that now hangs above the porch swing. It reads an elegant script: "Civic strength in stillness." Now every morning I sit with Murphy, sipping my lemonade, watching the world unfold from that same swing. I don't think about what was taken from me, because, in the end, nothing really was. If anything, I gained something. I gained a deeper connection with neighbors. I gained laughter, empathy, stories. I gained the knowledge that even when things get absurd, when someone calls the police on you for sitting on your own porch, you can still turn it into something meaningful and maybe, just maybe, something beautiful. So when strangers drive through our neighborhood and slow down to admire the houses, I sometimes see them glance my way. They don't recognize me from headlines or courtrooms. They just see a woman sitting peacefully on her porch swing, smiling at the world.